Hello and welcome to episode 91 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the casual spike, focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies in Modern and Pioneer. My name is Shane, here in Denver, Colorado, and with me on the line from Chicago, it's our godfather, Dave Harbarger.
I was a real proud papa this weekend, all because of our guy who's not here this week.
Oh yeah, Stanislav. Stan's going to be back next week. He is on his honeymoon, so tweet and email your congratulations directly to @Medium Gallery or us at the Dive Down if you want to. But a nice sub in, a tag in from outside the ropes is the one and only Evart Moughon, friend of the show, also known as Aspiringspike. Thanks for being here again, Evart. We love having you on. I think the pace has slowed down and I'm sad about it. Everyone's been here too reliably.
Well, I'm glad to be back. You know, just time is very convoluted these days. I don't know when I was on last, but it feels like I'm home being here again.
Oh, that's nice.
And we love having you on for these spoiler episodes. I feel like this is your third one or something.
I think it is.
It's perfect because it's nice to have someone else's concepts. I mean, like, you know, Dave, Stan, and myself, I think we all do think a little bit differently about cards. But sometimes, you know, we have the group think. It's nice to get an outside perspective. And we had our first episode of the Zendikar Rising spoilers last week, and this is our follow-up. So it's good to have you on again.
I just love having a good player on to talk about spoilers. It helps.
People who see things we don't. Oh yeah, that does make sense. This card is extremely good.
I read that completely wrong.
I don't know. Even the good players have a hard time with spoilers.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping that Shane's going to have to retract a couple of things he said last week, though. So we'll see.
I probably will. So on this week's episode, as we were mentioning, we get to do one of our favorite things, and that's ask a player that's better than us what they think about our favorite formats and about spoilers. So we're going to take a quick look at some challenges in Modern and Pioneer for a quick trip down Breakdown Lane before Zendikar Rising comes out, so we can just get a little snapshot of the formats before they probably change a little bit to maybe significantly. And then in the dive down, you guessed it, we're going to look at some more Zendikar Rising spoilers, pick Everett's brain about a few of the cards we talked about last week, and also bring a lot of this week's cards to the table.
But first, housekeeping. Thank you to new patrons Dustin S. and patron Mickey S. that increased his tier. Much appreciated, everybody. Your support helps the dive down keep going. Didn't have any new reviews this week, but if you feel like you have a minute to send us a little love letter via iTunes, please do. We appreciate it when you do. And
that's it. We like reviews.
Yeah. And if you want to support the Dive Down directly, you can check us out at patreon.com/the Dive Down, where any level of support gets access to our super secret, super wonderful Slack server and to our community of capricious rogues that inhabit those areas.
And of course, we're also brought to you in part by manatraders.com. They are kind enough to sponsor this podcast. We've been using Mana Traders for forever, still using them. I love using them. They run cool tournaments. There's a Modern tournament going on this month, correct?
There is. I think the qualifying rounds are either going to be over soon after this episode comes out or maybe the week after. So check out the dates there. But they're running a Modern tournament right now, and the Swiss will be coming up soon.
There's maintenance going on tomorrow, I think, because I'm off tomorrow and maybe a few days after that. And so I'm going to have some time to get in there, get back on Magic Online, see what's going on during the day. And I would use manatraders.com to do that. If you use code The Dive Down, when you sign up, you get 20% off your first 3 months, and they are good, and you should use them and use our code.
Everett, do you ever play in the Mana Traders events?
I do sometimes, just mostly like in my downtime. Mm-hmm. I think they're pretty good to just kind of crush out. I think it's a really cool tournament series, and I do recommend playing in it.
The thing that's the most interesting to me, and we talked about it before, is the matchmaking system that they use on their website actually kind of works surprisingly well, which is like really cool to see someone invest some time and development into making a good experience for players. So check it out. Not to spend too much time singing their praises, but I think it's a good tournament series to be a part of.
Dave, I think we're both the news desk this week. I'm gonna pass it over to you to do the local news, and I'll take sports and weather.
Yeah, exactly. So like Shane said, on the breakdown section this week, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at a couple of challenges in Modern and Pioneer before the Landfalls post Zendikar Rising release. So the first thing we wanted to look at was Modern, which is kind of my format of choice when it comes to playing. And I think the best thing to do is start with the Modern Challenges top 8 from last weekend. So I might just quickly go down the list of decks that were in the top 8. One thing to note, of course, is that this is another challenge top 8 that is filled with really recognizable players. Canister's in here, Musasabi, Laplace Gen, Nikachu, who's someone who I've seen on Twitter. Not sure if I recognize any of the other names in this top 8. One thing I wanted to ask, since we have Evart on, who's a big Magic Online player, is there... It seems like I recognize a lot of the players that end up in these top 8s kind of consistently. How do you think that happens? Is there just a group of players that are really grinding out there in the challenges, or?
Yes, I do think that is the case. People who play challenges often play them every weekend or almost every weekend. And you probably recognize the names because they belong to some good players. Mm-hmm. Definitely a lot of people on this list is players I like and respect.
Yeah, so first place this week was Canister on Humans. Kind of a surprise, right? Not a deck that I think Canister is known for playing. I've noticed him picking up more and more decks over the last year or so, not just kind of broken combo-y, dredgy KCI type stuff. But I thought it was interesting that he picked this deck up, and it's worth noting too that Humans also won the Modern qualifier event that happened on Sunday of last week. Well, we're not going to talk about that event much, but interesting that deck was on the top of both tournaments. What do you guys think about that?
I think that Humans is good right now. I think that we're seeing a shift in the Modern metagame where it seemed like for a month or two that Ponza, Prowess, and Uro Piles were just like the tier 1 decks, and there wasn't a lot of flexibility in that. But I think that Ponza is on the decline, and with Ponza on the decline, decks, I do think we're just seeing a shift in the meta, and specifically these Aether Vial tribal decks seem to be lining up well against a lot of the fair strategies, because a lot of the fair strategies are not playing sweepers because sweepers are not good against Prowess specifically. And I think Humans is the tribal deck that is the best against the Uro Piles. Although we also see Merfolk on this list, which I think is pretty good against them too. And I haven't played the Humans Prowess matchup, but I imagine it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's because the Auric champion out of the board makes it pretty tough for Prowess to do what they're doing, especially if you're on the heavy red, if you're on the ground versions, if you're on the red or red-black. It might be a little easier if you're flying over with Stormwing Entity, but...
Evart, do you think that Humans can be better in like a meta that is in transition or is becoming like more wide open? Or do you think it's kind of like when there's less interaction in the most popular decks, then Humans is going to do better, or neither? Or do you think it's just kind of like always okay and sometimes people just spike with it?
I think there's definitely truth to everything you said. I think that there are, it is always okay. I think Humans experts will always be able to find success with it. But I do think it does specifically shine in metas that are evolving for two reasons. One, playing threats is usually better than playing answers when a format is evolving, and Humans is definitely an excellent threat deck. And also when a format is evolving and people are not sideboarding cards against Humans, like for the aggro decks, people are playing Ariok Champion and Celestial Purge, Aether Gust. None of these cards are very good against Humans. I have found myself with, one or two, sometimes zero sideboard cards for my Humans decks recently, and I'm reevaluating that at the moment. But I think Humans specifically right now, or maybe not right now, but last weekend, people just weren't prepared for it. The sideboard cards were not there, and I think we saw that in both of these finishes.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the reactive decks move away from Wraths over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, just because, like you said, not great against Prowess, not really useful against Uro piles, right? So you end up with these decks that are running Path to Exile and no sweepers. And so occasionally we're getting these go wide decks kind of showing up. Nothing too weird in Canister's build of humans, I would say, except for the fact that he ran 4 Unsettled Mariner main deck, which I later saw him mention on Twitter that he would not do again. So I wouldn't necessarily take that as instructive.
I just thought that was interesting that he even thought to do it. I mean, maybe he thought that he was going to face down like a lot of interaction on the other side of the board and just wanted to make it more challenging. But yeah, he ended up thinking he wasn't that great.
I think the card's probably really good against Prowess, but like Dave said, Ariok Champion 4 in the sideboard, I really think makes the Prowess matchup favorable. And so 4 main deck Mariner is probably not mandatory.
Yeah, you don't need to protect people from gut shots and lightning bolts all that much when you have such good game plan game 2 and 3 probably. Let's talk about the second place deck. This was a pretty interesting deck as well. It was a Simic Urza kind of mid-range Uro pile, but it had Urza with no combo, so it was really reminiscent of those decks that were kind of made popular by Lotus Box towards the end of last year, but with Uro as well, and also with 4 Chalice of the Void main. So it was kind of like this interesting main board pre-boarding against a deck like Prowess, I imagine, that wants to cast a lot of spells. Blitz was the number 1 deck in the field. So, I mean, maybe this is a moment where a deck like this is going to be here for a minute and then kind of move away. But I thought it was an innovative thing to add to a deck that doesn't usually run Chalice as well, especially because, Urza can use it to tap for mana and things like that.
Yeah, we actually, I think, saw an Urza deck win a challenge either 2 or last week or 2 weeks ago. That was, I think, a Bant version. And I think this is a solid take on a mid-range archetype. Urza is still very powerful. Emeria is still very powerful. You get to play a lot of fair blue cards. I do think the Chalices were good metagame calls for this specific tournament. And I specifically like it out of this deck because I think this deck probably struggles against Prowess if you're not main decking the Chalices. I wouldn't be surprised if they get sided out in a lot of matchups, but I do like it a lot in this shell, and I think that the reports of Urza's death are greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always there ready to come back. It's still powerful. Not a ton of reasons for it to become not powerful. It just needs the right moment.
Yeah, I really will never forget, I think in our interview episode, Spike, how you said that Urza was just like the most powerful 4-mana card of all time.
Yeah, I don't know if I still agree with that statement. I definitely feel like when Astrolabe and Opal were in the format, Urza was the best thing to do for 4 mana.
Sure.
By a lot. Now I kind of think it's Uro. Uro really feels like a 4-mana card most of the time.
That's so funny. That's the joke I was going to make, but you got me. Yeah. You beat me to it.
The joke gets less and less funny every time we say Uro. And it just keeps escaping over and over again.
Oh, I have questions for you later about Uro.
Yeah.
Number 3 was Mono Red Aggro, the M. Hayashi Obosh Prowess build piloted by Among Us. Got to 3rd place. I think I unfortunately, for as much as I love Prowess, I haven't got a chance to pilot this deck yet, but it's been cool to see it hanging on still. Not the most popular version of Prowess still, but it certainly keeps getting kind of high-end results. What do you think about this deck, Spike?
I have seen a lot of players picking it up. I've played against it. The deck seems powerful. It's weird to me to play a mono red Prowess deck and just say Obosh is better than Manamorphose. And I think Manamorphose leads to some of your most powerful draws in these decks. And so forgoing it is very strange to me. But I also do understand that cards like Manamorphose are not very consistent in that you can keep a hand with like 3 Manamorphoses and flood out pretty often. But I think it is still weird to not see any. I also think like the first copy of Bedlam Reveler is usually pretty free in a deck like this. Like it's not usually going to be bad to draw 1 copy, but they've just decided to play 4 Seasoned Pyromancer instead, which I think is totally fine. I think that card's really good. You have a lot of flashback spells to get value off of it. I also do think the Obosh decks, the card Obosh is good. Companions now that they've been nerfed, they are now insurance policies that you pay for with your deck building restriction, and they give you insurance against flooding out. And I do think that that's one of the main ways the Prowess decks lose are due to mana flood, and so having a companion is super valuable because of that. And also the mono red mana base being less painful for the mirror is probably really important too.
Yeah, and I just want to give massive props to Evart for continuing to talk while my fire alarm was just going on in the background.
I'm always streaming through yard work and chainsaws going off outside, so I just tune it out.
Yeah. Fourth place, Merfolk by Nikachu, who is a kind of well-known Merfolk player. And the thing that was interesting to me about the sideboard of this deck is that it had 4 Chalice in the side, which is a play that I think you see out of Merfolk pretty often, along with 4 Force of Negation to be able to give it a little bit of kind of reactiveness to kind of, I imagine, just kind of against big spells, essentially, out of the board. So cool deck, another tribal deck, as Evart mentioned, that managed to top 8.
Yeah, I like tribal decks a lot right now. I also really like Spreading Seas at the moment. I've been playing 4 Spreading Seas and my blue-white Sharkblade deck, and I've been liking them a lot there. I think they're really well positioned in the format at the moment, although we are seeing a bit of a metagame shift, so maybe by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be old tech.
It's amazing how fast tech can evolve in an eternal format, huh?
Yeah, Modern specifically has been just so dynamic and changing so quickly for basically all year. It's been maybe my favorite year of Modern ever.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Dave, why don't you go check the condition of your kitchen? Make sure you're not like that dog with flames all around him. And so I'll take over the rest of this top 8. So our 5th place, Scrown, Grixis Death Shadow. Looks like a pretty stock list. Man, Evart, what is it with this deck? Like, sometimes it just seems like it's gone. It'll just like lay low in the weeds, and then like all of a sudden it'll just come back and be like, we'll just take 5th place in a top 8. Might take a couple, Grixis Death Shadow. Like when I think the thing that people say, and I want to check it via you, is Grixis Death Shadow only really good when Stubborn Denial is good, or do you think it has broader play than that?
I think it has broader play than that. I think the best Shadow players will basically always have a winning record with it, just like the best players of many different tier 2 and tier 3 decks in Modern. But I actually think the card Death Shadow and Gurmag Ingler, both of them are really good at the moment. A lot of the removal in Modern is red at the moment, and these big 1-mana black creatures line up very well against it. There's also a decent bit of combo decks, like Ad Nauseam, that are trying to fight against the Prowess decks, and Shadow is really good against those. I've actually been playing a few different Shadow variants, not really any Grixis, but some Esper and some Black-White, and I found a lot of success with those. Just the card Death Shadow is pretty good right now.
Yeah, I saw that on your on Twitter yesterday. That was pretty awesome, the 5-0 that you got with the Orzhov deck. So keep an eye out for that, everybody. 6th place.
Oh, you're back.
I'm back.
Okay, you're taking over these? That's good, because I got a lot to talk about later.
So 6th place, Mono White Devotion in Modern, with a bunch of wild stuff by Artem Kuhin, who is a name I do not recognize.
Border Post?
I think I played against this deck today.
Oh, really?
I lost to it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially kind of like it's Mono White Devotion that tries to end with Heliod Ballista combo, but it has a bunch of different stuff in this deck to help kind of like ramp out Devotion, make Nithos good, get a bunch of planes into play via things like Knight of the White Orchid and Weathered Wayfarer, and 7 different white border posts main, which I have to think are kind of there to help you make sure that you keep hitting your land drops and keep ramping up, and also up your Devotion as you go up, because the border posts each add a single pip from that.
They're also good with Weathered Wayfarer. You pick up a land, and then you can tap your Weathered Wayfarer to search your library for any land you want.
Yeah, and even help you a little bit when you have Knight of the White Orchid and you want to make sure that you're behind on lands to play it. So there's an interesting synergy there. It seems like a little fussy to me when you think about like stuff that's really good in Modern, but then when you think about, hey, Ballista and Heliod for the kill is still pretty good. And then also it gets to do things like run 4 Auriok Champions main, which is a good card to be able to get a life gain trigger off of, and also pretty good like pre-boarded tech against Prowess, essentially. And the last thing that it does that's like the Mono White Devotion deck from Pioneer is it runs a protection package, kind of like I forget the name of the Gideon card. What's the name of that? Gideon's Intervention that the Mono White deck was running in Pioneer. This deck runs 4 Leyline of Sanctity, which is really great with Nykthos, of course. It runs 3 Runed Halo main, and it runs 4 Mastery of the Unseen the Fate Reforged limited format Mega Bomb. And actually it was a card that I think was pretty good in Standard too, because I remember some wild green-white token matchups that had like 500 life or stuff like that. So it's an interesting riff on the Pioneer version. Not sure where it's going to go from here, but it's interesting that you played against the deck today. I mean, do you think this is a thing that could hang around?
I think that this is a good example of a deck that can take advantage of a very homogenized metagame where there's tons of red prowess decks that are very popular, and then the fair decks that are trying to beat on the red prowess decks are not prepared at all to play against a deck like this. And so I think that this is the type of deck that if you are very sure of the type of format you're walking into, you can do well, but it's probably not this type of deck that you can just play week in and week out and do well with it.
Still sweet to see some kind of innovative deck building and porting a strategy from one format to another. Last two decks, two really notable players, White Green Titan by Musasabi in 7th place, and then Devoted Devastation by Laplacian in 8th place. One thing I didn't think I would see coming is that there would be a top 8 with 7 Eldamri's calls in it, and from what I can tell, only 4 Uros in this top 8. So there were more Eldamri's calls than Uros in this top 8. But the White Green Titan deck is pretty interesting. This particular version of it had a ton of one-ofs, so I think it was really relying on that kind of like tutor ability of Eldamri's call to get the answer that you want. But essentially, is this deck kind of like Titan Shift, basically? Like a similar strategy in a sense where you're just kind of like ramping and trying to get Titan going as fast as possible without using Amulet? Or what do you think is the kind of special thing about this particular strategy, Evert, this new white-green one?
So I think this deck is, I believe, was an innovation by Francisco F. Paulas. I can never say his last name. He started off playing Aether Vial in it, and most people have cut the vials from the deck. But the big idea is that you can take advantage of Elvish Reclaimer, which is an M21 1-mana elf that you can tap it and spend 2 mana to sacrifice a land and search your library for a land card. And the big, combo, Splinter Twin combo, is to sacrifice Flagstones of Traquair, which whenever you sacrifice it or whenever it goes to the graveyard, you get to search your library for a plains. So that's not only ramping you, but it's letting you get Field of the Dead going. You have lots of really interesting tutor targets like Ghost Quarter, Bajuka Bog to go with it. And so this is really just a mid-range deck that's trying to let your Elvish Reclaimer give you a lot of value and accelerate you. And you can play board control with Dryad Valakut. And you have Eladamri's Call to tutor up your specific tools for the matchup. So I would definitely just view this as somewhere in between Titan Shift and Amulet Titan. I think that the very best Primeval Titan players will know when to select Red-Green Valakut, when to select Amulet Titan, when to select this, when to play with Karn the Great Creator. And I don't play enough with these decks to really tell you which one to do at the moment, but I do think this deck is real, and if you like casting Primeval Titan, you should learn this and try to figure out what kind of metas you want to play this version in.
And then last, as we mentioned, Devoted Devastation by Laplacian, well known for playing this style of deck, making a top 8. All right, the overall meta, really quickly, the top 3 decks, kind of as Evert hinted, in this overall meta were Izzet Blitz with 3 decks, Uro Piles with 3 decks, Gruul Midrange with 3 decks. There were even more prowess decks, essentially. There were 2 more mono red aggro, which I'm pretty sure were the Obosh decks, and then also 2 more Luris aggro decks. So essentially you had 7 prowess decks in the top 32, in my mind anyway. I know that they're different flavors. We did an episode about how they're each different flavors, but still a lot of Monastery Swiftspear floating around in this metagame, essentially. Little less Uro, it feels like, made it into this top 32, and definitely a little bit less Gruul midrange with this kind of other stuff kind of bubbling up to the top. And a lot of one-ups in this. There were, I think, 8 or 9 one-ups. Pretty interesting to see as well. Do you think that does this top 32 kind of illustrate some of the meta shift that you were kind of hinting towards earlier?
Yeah, I think it does. This is an incredibly diverse top 32, one of the most diverse I've ever seen. And I do think it is an accurate reflection of what I've been experiencing in Modern lately. It seems like many different decks are viable, and if you have unique tech or strategies or way you're attacking the prowess decks and the Uro Piles and the Ponza decks, you are going to find success, especially if your deck is also lining up well against the tribal decks that seem to be on the rise. The format is very much in flux, and I think people are getting better at playing against Uro. Uro is a very obnoxious card. It's a card I don't enjoy playing with very often, but it's a card I do play with. But I do think that there are lots of answers to it, and I do think the card is probably not just incredibly dominant in the format, despite, I think the prevailing mindset that it is.
Certainly this week. I mean, I've definitely noticed that it feels a little bit on the retreat for whatever reason. And so I guess it's nice to hear that a card that people are banging the drum for banning a lot is potentially being a little solved, especially in a format as powerful as Modern. So fingers crossed that we don't have to go through more upheaval, I guess. I guess the last thing I wanted to ask before we kind of leave the Modern chapter of this is, what have your favorite decks been lately to play, and kind of, did you have any stuff that you wanted to talk about as far as just what you've been doing the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, sure. I've been playing a lot of blue-white Shark Blade, Stone Blade with 4 Shark Typhoons. I've found a lot of success with it lately. I've been winning a ton with it. I did play in this challenge, but I was double queuing in the PTQ, and I made a mistake in the PTQ, and I immediately dropped from the challenge because I was double queuing. And I did really well in the PTQ. I just have been really liking the main deck spreading seas, like answering Utopia Sprawl, answering the Tron decks, which are popular. It's just also just disrupting your prowess opponent's mana is really relevant. I really like the Sharkblade deck with main deck spreading seas. I've been messing around a lot with Sultai Gifts, which is an Uro pile that's trying to take advantage of Gifts Ungiven being very synergistic with Mystic Sanctuary and Uro. So a lot of times you're going to Gifts for Uro, Life from the Loam, sometimes a fetch land to get a Mystic Sanctuary, sometimes a Lonely Sandbar to dredge your Loam, and then a really powerful sorcery to get, like Hour of Promise, Splendid Reclamation, Damnation, Time Warp. And I've really enjoyed that shell. I actually think on a raw power level, that is the most powerful Uro pile. However, the deck is incredibly difficult to play. Gifts Ungiven is just a really skill-intensive card. And the deck is way more vulnerable to Graveyard Hate and Ashiok than the other Uro piles. But I've been liking those decks, or that deck specifically. I've been spending a lot of time tuning it, and I think it's been a lot of fun. I've also been playing Orzhov and Esper Shadow. It started off as a donation deck, which I do on my stream where people can pay, and I'll play a league, and I went 13-2 over 3 donation decks with Esper Shadow, and I ended up transitioning to Orzhov Shadow for more consistent mana, and I wanted to play 4 Ranger Captains. I wanted to play Orzhov Charm, mostly because I think the card is fun, and I've been doing well with that as well. And I mostly think for the 2 biggest takeaways is if you're not turning on Delirium, and if you're not really in on Delving Gurmag Angler, you don't really need Street Wraith so much. The card Street Wraith is a card that can lead you to getting flooded out or mana screwed too often. Just a card that just draws a card and provides no selection will lean you towards those higher ends of variance.
Because it kind of leans you into loose takes or loose keeps. I mean, right?
And it's a bad top deck. Yeah. But loose keeps. And I have not missed the Street Wraiths. Growing my shadows hasn't been a problem, especially with 4 silent clearing in the deck. And I also haven't missed Temur Battle Rage because I've been playing 4 Giver of Runes to get through blockers and 4 Ranger Captain to stop the combo decks a little bit. And I also kind of think that Temur Battle Rage is a little bit of a crutch in the shadow decks where whenever you cast Temur Battle Rage, you're winning the game. So you think this card is really, really good, but I think you're winning a lot of those games anyways. And a lot of times you're losing because you've drawn Temur Battle Rage instead of a threat or a removal spell. Splashing red is not free. It's kind of like Tendrils of Agony is the best card in Legacy because every time you cast it, you win the game. I think that attitude of Temur Battle Rage is kind of the same. People can't get away from it, but I think that they probably should be, and I've really liked both the Esper and the Orzhov shells.
Awesome. I mean, I gotta say, when I saw that Uro Gifts deck show up the first time, I was like, this is some next level stuff. And I was immediately like, this is a beautiful deck design that I don't think I will ever play. Because like you said, Gifts Ungiven is not an easy card to play, even in a deck that's pretty scripted, like Storm. I think a lot of the times you kind of, especially without a lot of reps, you're kind of like, what am I supposed to be picking out here? So in a deck that is not trying to get to a deterministic plan like Storm is, where you are trying to figure out like the best value pile, that seems pretty tough to figure out what to do in a lot of different situations.
Yeah, it was, it went through like many different drafts. It was one of the most fun decks one of the most fun I've ever had brewing a deck. It started off as Bant. I was playing Unburial Rites in the sideboard for a long time. I was Sultai, splashing the Rites, and I like just straight Sultai more. And even though I built the deck, it's incredibly hard to play, and I have been making a ton of mistakes while I play it. But when I'm playing tight with the list, I actually think it's incredibly good. And if you like Gifts Ungiven, you can go to my twitter.com/aspiringspike and find the list, and I think it's pretty good.
Awesome. Shane, you want to take us through some thoughts on Pioneer?
Yeah, we promised some Pioneer content. We'll have to get through this quickly because we do want to save time for spoilers. So what I thought we could do here is just look at the 2 latest challenges that took place over the last weekend, see what people are doing well with there. Because we haven't looked at Pioneer too closely lately, and we looked at it a couple episodes in a row after the unbannings and things like that, or the unbanning at least. So first, like Dave mentioned in the modern section, some of our best performing players here in these top 32s are the people who are atop the trophy leaderboard in like the Pioneer and modern leaderboards on Magic Online. We've got Claudio, who's the trophy leader by a good margin on Sunday's challenge, finished first. Second place was the 5th place player on the leaderboard, Harry 13. We see a lot of names that we mention all the time, like Poker's Wizard, Batuina, Doom Switch, Goldakat, CWS, which is Caleb Shearer, Misplaced Ginger, Indian Pancake. They all showed up in these 2 challenges as well. And just like Magic Online is just full of killers, right?
Yeah, it's just a good reminder that if you want to get good at Magic, it's hard to beat the player pool that you have access to, just utterly destroying you, that you can find on Magic Online.
And that's the best way to get better, is just play against good people.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is let's look at these combined top 32s and look at some interesting things happening in Pioneer. Because the last time we looked at the meta, we saw things like Mono Green Walkers, Niv to Light, Mono Black Aggro. They were kind of ruling the roost. They were our tier 1, tier 1.5. Azorius Spirits was up there. Things are different 4 or 5 weeks later. Team of Reclamation is 17% of our top 32. It's not much different than the last time we talked about Rec and the deck construction, but people are just realizing that this is probably the most powerful thing you can be doing in the format. You've got your board control spells, you've got your counter spells, you can control that early and mid game, and then the end game seems up your alley, Evart, which, the mana production of Reclamation. You got Shark Typhoon, you got Uro. You probably don't like that, but you close those games out pretty effectively.
Yeah, it's so weird to me to not see any copies of Dig Through Time in any of these decks. I guess Uro is just better than Dig Through Time. I don't know.
Goodness.
It's both cards are legal in the format. And you could even argue that Dig Through Time plays better with Reclamation than Uro does, but they're still playing Uro instead. I'm not saying it's definitely better to play Uro, but it's wild to me that Uro is seeing more play than Dig.
Yeah, unbelievable.
But yeah, 17%, pretty darn good. Esper Control at 11%. So this is the same deck, same Walker, enchantment heavy, 80 card Yorion build in the main, and they have Yorion, of course, in the companion zone as well. This is our second most popular and performing deck in the meta, 11%. And then we go down to Orzhov Auras, Mono Black Aggro, and Jeskai Luka, all at 8%. So Orzhov Auras appears to be back. Not much really seems to have changed with the deck itself. There's a few various like tech creatures, like there might be some Hushbringers to stop ETB triggers. There might be like a Danto Vanguard, which I think is good for like keeping your creature alive and also beating down pretty effectively. Like if you don't really care about your life total that much, a Danto Vanguard can get indestructible. Selfless Savior might show up in various numbers, a new sacrifice type creature to keep your other creatures alive. Luris is now standard, well, continues to be standard in the companion zone, just in case, because why not? But yeah, so like, Mono Black Aggro, Jeskai Luka, Orzhov Auras, it's slightly less popular than Black Aggro used to be, but we are seeing Orzhov and Luka creep up a little bit. And then we get to the decks we saw at the top before, Niv to Light, Mono Green Walkers, and Mono Black Vampires at 6%. So Niv and Mono Green are falling back down to like some sort of typical normal percentages for, normal tier 2 decks. People maybe are moving on to other more powerful decks like Temur Rek or Esper Control even, or maybe people have just learned how to fight against these strategies, or people just want something new or different.
I haven't played a lot of Pioneer lately. So Everett, I wasn't sure what you thought about the fact that, I think everybody, when the big bannings happened, thought that Niv to Light was going to sit atop the metagame for a while here because mid-range was just going to be kind of the best. But it's interesting to see Temur kind of take what might be part of that role. Instead, Reclamation, I think, is a hard deck to sort of like archetype because it's, when Uro's there, you kind of think it's probably a control-ish mid-range deck, a little different from Niv, but maybe it's eating up some of that market share. I don't know. What do you think?
I would probably classify Reclamation as a ramp controlled deck. And I think Reclamation decks, from my experience in Pioneer, which hasn't been a ton recently, but I've been playing a little bit, I think that the Reclamation decks are really favored against the Niv Mizzet decks in my experience. And I think that that's probably why we see Niv declining, is that even maybe Niv is good against everything but Rek is, rising in dominance. There does seem to be a pretty healthy fluctuation in the metagame. I think that a combination of modern being incredibly popular and historic being pretty pushed on Arena is really hurting Pioneer. I think that a lot of its player base, left when the format was, so unplayable in the past, and it's not returning to, the numbers we were seeing before Theros got printed. But I hope that Zendikar maybe shoots some life into Pioneer. I'll definitely be playing some Pioneer when Zendikar comes out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. Finishing up our combined top 32 mono red Lotus combo, about 5%. So it's a slight dip from mono red. Lotus combo kind of sticks around in the 5%-ish area. Other about 20%. So what's not there? So the Jund Sacrifice deck that was built around Bolas's Citadel has fallen back down into perhaps reality. There's only a single copy making both top 32s. Azorius Spirits, that made up 7% of the meta 4 or 5 weeks ago, is completely absent. Only a single Bant Spirits deck is in the field. Sultai Delirium, totally absent in both top 32s. It was over 6% of the field previously. Winota as well. Absent. No Winota decks that I saw in here. So that's a pretty big shift when we see decks that were 6 and 7% of the field, like 4% for Winota, just kind of nowhere. Maybe it's an aberration. Maybe it's just a consolidation of power.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure because I haven't been playing a ton. I've always felt like the Jund Citadel decks are not very good. The mana curve is all over the place. You're really soft to like Rest in Peace and counter spells on your Citadel, and aggro decks like Fuel to some extent. It's also really funny to me how it seemed like people were saying that Sultai Delirium and Niv to Light were just going to be so dominant in Pioneer after the bans, and Sultai is really falling out of favor. Winota being absent is weird to me. I think Winota is pretty good in the format. At least that's been my perception. I think the biggest problem is the mana. And I think that it really the mana gets a lot better when Zendikar comes out with the new double-sided lands. And so I could definitely see Winota picking back up in popularity when Zendikar comes out.
So yeah, I mean, I think Pioneer's kind of it's definitely transitioned over the past 5 weeks or so, but I think it's nothing crazy is happening. I think sort of we see the same melange of decks in different configurations on the top 32 list. So I hope that Zendikar does blow things up a little bit. I really am hopeful for the pathways, especially in the allied decks and perhaps some 3-color decks to improve things there. That would be nice to bring a little bit more balance of power between the enemy and allied mana, but everyone's heard me talk about that a lot. Yeah, so I think we just have to we will be talking about both formats in the weeks to come after Zendikar becomes legal online and in paper. If you're somewhere, perhaps not in the United States, where you can be playing paper Magic. So, but keep your ear to the breakdown. And with that, let's transition over into the dive down, where we're going to be talking about Zendikar Rising spoilers part 2. So stay with us.
right, and we're back. And as is normal on our spoiler shows, we have a little bit of a quote-unquote methodology for how we look at cards here on the Dive Down. 1-mana spells, 2-mana creatures, 3-mana walkers, unique cards, cheap cards, cards that draw you cards. These are the kind of things that we looked at. If you want to hear a little bit more in depth about that, check out last week's episode. Before we dive into spoilers all the way, I did want to ask our special guest, Evart, if he had any thoughts about how he looks at a spoiler when he's kind of evaluating cards, if there's a way that you think about things, or if you just kind of take it card by card and just kind of, as you see things come up on Twitter, go, oh, that's great. That goes in the I should remember this pile versus chaff.
Yeah, so I'm very, very not rigid with my evaluation. Like, I don't specifically search out 1-mana spells, cheap creatures. I try to take everything into account, every single card, if I can, really evaluate it, compare it to other things that are popular. Is this a better version of something that's being played? Does this synergize well with something that's good at the moment? And I think that, you definitely get a feel for it, and you can, see what card has potential in constructed. But, there have been too many cards that have slipped by that, you've dismissed because it's 4 mana or because it, is just a little bit off the wall and that it's in a design space that's never been seen before. I think Fires of Invention is a pretty good example. At least for me, is a card I evaluated pretty lowly. And so I just try to keep an open mind with every single card. And I also try to not really form a super hard opinion until every single card from the set is spoiled, because every card matters in context with the other cards in the set, especially when we're getting a lot of cards, specifically in Zendikar, where with the land spell flip cycle, I think that there are a lot of decks in Eternal formats that are going to want to play some number of these, but whichever ones they want is really going to matter in the context of the set when in its entirety.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring those up, because definitely, we spent some time last week talking about the land spell cards, the flip lands. And I was really curious to get your take on both of the different kind of categories that we have. So right at the end of the breakdown, we started to talk about the pathway lands a little bit. I think that coming out of last week, we were a little bit kind of like, maybe it feels to us like the pathways are more helpful in Pioneer than anywhere else. But I was really curious kind of if you might be willing to tell us what you think about these cards, where they might fit, if you think they have any potential for modern play as well, or just kind of what you think about the pathways in general, because evaluations from people have been kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I do think they're hard to evaluate. I really like these lands a lot. I think that they're very, very interesting. I think are inherently very powerful. Now they fix either of your... I doubt any deck that's more than 2 colors in Modern is going to want to play this, but I think that decks that have 2-color decks that want all their lands into play untapped, lands that are potentially worried about cards like Boil, decks that are potentially... that have not a lot of 2-mana symbols in their cost of their spells, or potentially heavier one color and lighter on the other color, I think could definitely want these cards. I've been playing a blue-red Through the Breach deck that plays no islands to dodge Boil and play Boil in the sideboard. And there's the blue-red dual land is immediately going to be a 4 of in that deck.
I can't believe we're in a world where we have to dodge Boil.
It's, you can blame Uro and Mystic Sanctuary mostly for that.
I've been dodging Boil since 1998, I guess, right? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I have a similar feeling about those, where it feels like these are really good lands for really assertive decks that care a lot about untapped lands, don't care as much about fetching, maybe, because these you'll get to pick, but you have to commit for the long term with these lands. And so for me, I definitely was sitting here thinking, I really like playing the blue-red Blitz deck. Maybe it's going to get less good in the meta, but maybe that's these are a card that end up in there that gives you even more consistent untapped lands without pain on the first couple of turns, along with your Spire Bluff Canals. But
I just can't see specifically that deck really ever wanting it to enter as a blue source. I'm not sure. I haven't played much of that deck, but it's so red heavy with just that light blue splash. And I think that these lands are going to want you to be more so 2 colors without super stringent mana requirements is my prediction. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I do view the prowess deck as having pretty tough mana requirements, just with all that one red symbols.
Not being able to end up with something that's just an island on the board, essentially. Okay. I mean, that's good to know, too. Do you think that, so you think that these are good cards, they'll see some play in certain decks? In Pioneer, we talked about how they're going to help a lot of allied strategies, probably, especially allied aggressive strategies, since they're just kind of the best option there. Shane, have you changed any of your thinking about pathways in the last week, or is that kind of where you are still?
No, I think I'm more confident about my pathway take than I am about my spell land take, like the flippy lands. I think, I usually undervalue flexibility. I think the flippy lands, and again, this is a take I think we should get from Evart. I think the flippy lands are probably better than I think they are, but I think that there will be a time and a place that the pathways get played, and I think it's going to take some experimentation to figure out when and how many. And that's what I think is great about them, is that they're not obvious. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, man, maybe they'll be good, maybe they'll be okay. Let's play with our numbers here between fast lands and pathways. And I think that's what's cool about it.
It's honestly, these lands make me so frustrated that fetch lands are so dominant in Modern, because if fetch lands weren't, then you'd have really interesting deck building decisions for your 2 and 3 color mana bases that would include these lands, fast lands, filter lands, man lands.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is one of my favorite parts of Pioneer, is brewing the mana bases, and I expect these to be definitely good in Pioneer.
Here you go. All right. So the second kind of cycle of lands, let's say, although it's a giant number of cards in the Zendikar set, are the double-faced spell lands.
Flippy lands, Dave.
Yeah, the flipping lands. Sorry, land spell lands. I'd love to talk about one in particular, and that is Agadeem's Awakening, which wasn't spoiled last week when it came out, and this is the mythic black land, and I actually kind of think this might be the best one. We'll see, but maybe it's just because it fits in a couple of decks that I like to play. But Agadeem's Awakening is X black. It's a sorcery. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that each have a different converted mana cost X or less. On the backside, it is a black mana source that deals 3 damage if you want it to come into play untapped. I mean, I think I've seen people throw this into Shadow already, but I think it's possible that there's other decks that can just run this too. I think it's most likely just to be something that you cast on 5 mana. You get a 2 CMC card and a 1 CMC card back from your graveyard. There's probably other powerful places that can go. Maybe you bring back a Mem Knight with it for some reason somewhere. But what do you think of this card, Evart?
I like it a lot. I think it's going to be very good in 2 color Shadow decks. It's possible that 3 color ones want to play it. It's a huge bummer to me that you can't traverse for it, because it's always a sorcery in every zone besides the play. But I do think it's good in Shadow decks, just specifically because Shadow is so powerful for 1 mana. Then you often have Tarmogoyf or Ranger Captain to get back with it. In the Orzhov Shadow deck I've been playing, I do plan on playing, I think, 2 copies to start off with.
That's awesome. You got your Scourge the Skyclave on 2 now, too, you know what I'm saying? Maybe.
I really feel like Scourge the Skyclaves does not go in traditional Shadow decks. I think that you need to be able to deal your opponent damage more aggressively than traditional Shadow decks do. I think that you need to either be pairing it with Lava Spike or Monastery Swiftspear, Wild Nacatl. Because the Shadow decks, like a lot of times they hit their opponent right now for the first time on turn 4 with their Death Shadow, and this card really doesn't want you to do that. There are a lot of Modern decks that stay at 20 life for a while.
Well, that's too bad. All right, got a little check on my pre-order there. So how about the rest of the spell lands, just kind of in general? Are there any other ones that stand out? To me, I still feel like this mechanic is super powerful. And it just feels like there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are playing these in different places. I mean, you were talking a minute ago about like the interesting kind of mana-based decisions that come from building with new land cards, essentially. This is a whole new dimension that we haven't dealt with before in any format ever.
Honestly, the only one that seems incredibly powerful to me is Turn Timber Symbiosis, the green mythic one. That one seems like a 4 of in the Amulet Titan decks. It's a tap land that it can enter untapped, which is also very powerful to turn 1 Amulet, but you can just play it tapped and untaps for Amulet, and it's also 7 mana to probably hit a Primeval Titan, or at least get a good chance at it, at least a Dryad of the Groves, which gets 3 counters, and just that that seems very, very good to me in Titan. To both be a land and a Titan seems bananas. Besides specifically that one, I think that basically all of the other ones are fine and maybe archetype role players, but will overall not be incredibly dominant or impactful. I really have been viewing all of these cards basically as charms, like Celestia Charm, Archmage's Charm, where they have multiple modes that are overcosted, where, you know, it's not overcosted to play a tap land, but you know, it's similar to that, to not an effect you're happy with, but it gets that power and the versatility. And I don't think any of them are going to be, besides maybe this green one, going to be too crazy dominant, but a lot of them are interesting, and I see a lot of deck building potential with them, and I think they're going to be a lot of fun, and I think overall they're a hit for me. But I see a lot of people freaking out about the power level, thinking that they're too good, but I don't expect that to be the case.
So maybe they're kind of like one or two ofs that help you smooth your mana versus getting action late in the game, and that's just kind of the slot they fit.
Exactly, especially with the London Mulligan. Magic for a while has been very much about, in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, curving out and getting on the board ahead of your opponent and staying ahead on board. And all of these cards are bad at doing that. And I think that these cards maybe would have been incredibly warping and dominant 5 years ago, but now we have the London Mulligan. We have tons of other mana sinks to reduce mana screw and mana flood. We have Adventure, Escape, Companion, you know, and this mechanic as well. All of these are intended to reduce non-games in Magic due to mana screw and mana flood. And I think that is good design, but I don't think that these cards are going to be so
warping. Awesome. Shane, how you feeling about your take now?
Mildly confident, I guess. What I wanted to do though is Evart, you know, since we did cover a list of cards last week, I ran these by you. Is there anything that we talked about last week that you really want to hit before we move on to new cards?
Yeah, I noted in the show notes. Let me see. Of these, I'm interested in talking about Cleansing Wildfire. I really like that card. And we already talked about the black flip land. Oh, the new Nahiri is also a card I want to talk about.
Oh, Stan will be happy if you have good things to say.
I have great things to say about the new Nahiri.
So we shared the list of cards that we talked about last week with you too, Evart, and you called out two cards in particular that you wanted to talk about. One of them was the new Nahiri, which Stan kind of vociferously spoiled last week before he disappeared on his honeymoon. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this card.
I think Nahiri is great. She definitely comes with a lot of deck building restrictions, but I think she does a lot of really powerful things. Specifically with Colossus Hammer is where she's really interesting to me. Not only does she find your Colossus Hammer, and digging 6 cards is a lot with that -2, but she also makes a creature and equips the hammer to that creature all in one card. And she you know, beyond just that really powerful synergy with Colossus Hammer, she's good with Batterskull. She's good with the swords that are already seeing play in Modern, if you want to play her in Modern. Her +1 gives you board advantage, her -2 gives you card advantage, and her -3, which she survives when she -3s, gives you removal, which is incredibly powerful on a 4-mana Planeswalker with a decent amount of loyalty. The card I could see being main or side in the existing Boros Hammer decks. I could see it being in the main deck of Stoneblade decks in Modern. I could see it creating a kind of a hammer archetype in Pioneer with Colossus Hammer and Sigarda's Aid. I just love the new Nahiri.
Wow, somewhere.
Yeah, Stan's just nodding, stroking his chin. Yes.
Exactly. He's in a vortex in New Mexico somewhere, feeling a disturbance in the magnetic field, as Evert's saying a lot of things that he said last week as well. Actually,
awesome.
He was very pro this card. Definitely loved what you said about making a token and equipping something that has a prohibitive cost to it immediately. Shane and I were both a little bit kind of like, really, for 4 mana? And I was kind of like, I feel like this card kind of goes with Winota because it searches for Winota in Pioneer, but I'm totally understanding what you guys are saying here too, especially when you look at the kind of broken aspect of something like the Colossus Hammer package, which is kind of, you know, it's a deck that's out there that's kind of floating around that had some real results. People were calling it the new Infect for a while. So maybe I could definitely see there being something there. So you're looking forward to brewing around that.
Yeah, I'll definitely be casting the card a few times. I also love Jeskai Nahiri, the old version with Nahiri the Harbinger, and I think Nahiri is my favorite Planeswalker character.
Wow.
I'm going to embrace my Timmy, so I'm just excited to cast the card again.
She's so angry. She's like she's angry in every story now. It's interesting because originally she was sort of like didn't have quite as deep of a story, and then in Shadows over Innistrad they were like, "No, I'm here to kill you, Soren."
So I'm just angry.
Yeah, I just love it.
And then the other card you point out that you want to talk about is a card that I think we had an interesting discussion about last week too, which is Cleansing Wildfire. So I'd be curious to see what you think about this card, which, as a reminder, is the 2-mana non-basic land destruction spell that lets your opponent go and get a new land, but it cantrips.
I love everything about this card, honestly. I love that no longer is your sideboard hate against Tron going to let you still lose to turn 3 Tron on the draw. I love that it fixes your mana when you've been Blood Mooned in Modern. You can just target your own land and get a basic that's not, in play. I really think it's interesting in Pioneer alongside Darksteel Citadel and Cascading Cataracts. There's no rampant growth in Pioneer, but with Darksteel Citadel or Cascading Cataracts, you can turn this card into rampant growth plus draw a card. So I'm kind of thinking about a Fires of Invention, Karn the Great Creator, Cleansing Wildfire deck, trying to use it as a rampant growth in Pioneer. It also works with Flagstones of Traquair in Modern to be rampant growth, draw a card. And so then you could have Boom Bust and this card as a 2-mana spell that wants you to have a special land in play. I don't think that those decks are very good, and I don't think this card makes those decks good, but it's interesting, and I like it a lot.
Fascinating. I mean, I will say this is another card that Stan took a different angle on than kind of Shane and I were both kind of like, this card's really good. It's great out of your sideboard. It's great as land hate. I love the idea of having it around to help you with Blood Moon and decks where you're running it for land hate anyway. It's a really smart idea. Stan was kind of pointed out the Darksteel Citadel interaction as well, but he was mostly thinking about it from Is It in Soul kind of area where it's just kind of like you play it for value in that package, which could be an interesting kind of thing to do as well. One thing that I thought about last week was playing it with Leonin Arbiter and a kind of taxes-y build, which I think could be another place for it too. So I think it's really tough just on rate. Like this card is just really good on rate, and so it feels like it's going to end up somewhere powerful kind of no matter what we do. It's got so much text on it for 2 mana and it draws a card. It's hard to put more on a playable card, Yeah,
it seems so flexible and interesting. And I actually think it's going to be a pretty fun card for the format because it's not really land destruction, It's like I think it's going to make people play more fair and honest mana bases, which I like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get in some new cards, some new stuff.
Okay,
let's do it. This is like no particular order, right? Because I think we've got a different mix. We've got a mix of cards I think are like semi-sure things and kind of maybe just cool things. I want to start with a big maybe just cool thing. Roiling Vortex, 1 and a red, enchantment. So this is not a crazy red enchantment. This is a cheap red enchantment. So again, we have a cost of 2. That's good. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Roiling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. Red, activated ability. Your opponents can't gain life this turn. So this card's doing a lot of different things, right? So it's just it's consistent pings, which can do things like, let's say, trigger if a player lost life this turn, or just some random something like that, right? It's a ping, it's consistent, it happens. If it has certain types of hate, if no mana was spent to cast that spell. So that's things like, Cascade or, certain spells in Dredge or things like that. So not exactly every deck, or even in Dredge, it's only really good against Creeping Chill or something like that.
Oh, you don't cast Creeping Chill for some reason.
That's right.
Creeping Chill is my least favorite card in Magic.
Yeah, I think you and Dave. And then red, you can just pay a red, and your opponents can't gain life this turn. Typically pretty decent for a red mage to have that ability. I think it's interesting, but I don't know. Does it do too much? Not that great. Is it doing enough to be awesome as a flexible sideboard card? Is it part of a main deck build?
I think the power is definitely there. I think that all 3 modes on the card are good. All 3 modes on the card won't always be relevant. Definitely seems like it is a great option for red mages in the sideboard. My biggest hesitance to, put it in the main deck is just the fact that it's really bad in the red mirrors. It's really bad against opposing aggro decks because it's a symmetrical effect with the ping. So, if this sees play in Modern and Pioneer, I think that if it's in the main deck, it's going to be because the format is, playing a lot of Force of Negations, Mistress Baubles, Uros. But if that's not the case and the format is more diverse, I think this is an excellent sideboard card in Modern and Pioneer.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I just, of course, look at this card and see Sulfuric Vortex, which is better, right? I mean, it's 3 mana, it deals 2 damage, but there's a lot of stuff going on here that makes up for it. It's just a good tool for a burn deck or an aggressive red deck to have access to. And while I think the text on here kind of helps with stuff like Uro, the red activated ability helps with nerfing life gain and, helps with creeping chill, even though it doesn't help you from getting damage. It keeps them from gaining life at least. It just seems like a lot of stuff here. The only thing I keep wondering is you already have a sort of Sulfuric Vortex effect in Eidolon in some ways. And is this going to compete for slots with that? Because I think that this card just loses to Eidolon. But I guess if you want even more of kind of pinging effects, more kind of punishing effects, this is a good card to have access to. And I'll definitely have it around. So another card that I thought was cool that I wanted to ask you about, especially since we just talked about Nahiri and Colossus Hammer, is Thieving Skydiver.
This card's so cool.
Which is Merfolk Rogue. It has kicker X. X cannot be 0. It's a flying 2/1 for 1 and a blue, and it says, when Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. Very tricky and cute, but the only reason I threw this in here was because it can equip your Colossus Hammer to itself for 2 mana or for 3 mana. So,
that's interesting. I didn't realize you could target your own equipment.
Exactly. This is what the rub was for me. Like, I put it in the list last week, and I was like, I love the design. It's probably unplayable. And then Dave was like, you can just equip your own thing, and I was like, what?
Yeah, that's the third way to equip Colossus Hammer for pretty cheap in Pioneer with Sigarda's Nahiri and Thieving Skydiver. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's good, right? But it is a cool card, and it has flying too, so it gets evasion with the Colossus Hammer, which is a nice thing.
Well, Colossus Hammer makes it lose flying.
Oh, that's right, because it's too heavy.
It's also a Merfolk, and I could see siding this in or maybe main decking it in the Aether Vial mirrors if Vial decks are really popular, and just stealing your opponent's Vial and getting a good tempo swing that way.
Also, I mean, your stuff has Island Walk oftentimes in Merfolk, so just have an island walking hammer carrier. Why not?
Merfolk Hammer? Is that what you're talking about now?
I'm sure Nikachu will play it at some point.
Try it out. I do love this design though, so keep an eye out for it.
Everett, is there a card that we didn't talk about last week that is piquing your interest?
I posted. I got a few down here. I think the new Omnath is amazing. The landfall one. It's 4 mana, 1 of every color besides black, and when it's a 4 mana 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, it draws a card. It has landfall, and the first time a land enters, you gain 4 life. The second time, you make the 4 mana that it costs: red, white, green, blue. And then the third time a land enters, it deals 4 damage to your opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. I think this card is modern playable, and I think this card will be good in modern. I think that it specifically slots into the Soul Herder shells. I've been actually finding some success with a Soul Herder deck that is these colors, because I've been kind of splashing red in the Bant Soul Herder decks for Avalanche Riders, because I think they really struggle against the big mana strategies. And I think this card slots right in. I'm super excited for it. I think the card is just great.
Awesome. One thing I want to note is that it doesn't hit creatures. It doesn't hit creatures? It only hits each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control.
I see. Well, it's not as good then, but I still think it's good.
Yeah, that still seems really, really good just for the other abilities it has as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to sort of overlook a card like Omnath because it's it's 4 colors. It's a legendary. It's going to just be some random EDH card or something like that. But it's that's the kind of thing that you can't just skip over. And I think that's something that I would typically fall into, like, oh, EDH card, bye, let's move on.
That's literally what I did with it. So I appreciate you bringing it to my attention.
Yeah, I think the card is just going to be great.
Do you think this is a 4 of in that deck, or is that not the type of deck where you can fit this many of that type of thing?
Well, I've been playing Court of Calling and Eladamri's Call, so probably not a 4 of. You may play 1 or 2 as a tutor target, unless you want to build more around it somehow. You can play more copies, but it's hard to play 4 of any 4-mana creature in Modern.
Yeah, and Legend too, I guess, makes it a little complicated as well, but that's awesome. Definitely not a card that was on my radar. Why don't we go to another one from your list that you have here?
So I also have Emeria's Call / Ondu's Inversion. These are the white mythic and rare spell flip lands. And I just wanted to talk about these kind of briefly because I could see playing one or the other. One of them is an 8-mana, destroy all non-land permanents, and the other one is a 7-mana, make 2 4/4 angels that gain indestructible until your next turn. And I like 2 things about these cards in Modern. One, I like that you are almost always just going to play it as a land, and then in the late game, you can bounce this land with Cryptic Command, and then have a really powerful spell to cast. And also, you can potentially just have access to this really powerful spell after you've discarded it, or after you've cast it one time to Mystic Sanctuary back. Just really over the top spells are good in the late game, but mostly bouncing the land with Cryptic Command and then casting it in the late game is interesting to me. And the cost of playing 1 or 2 of these isn't that high. Yeah,
that was my read on these 2 cards as well. And it just depends on which one you feel like you want and what build you're in. Like, do you need Emeria's Call if you have 4 Shark Typhoons? Maybe you don't need the big kind of closer, but the Wrath is nice. The modal Wrath is nice to have in that case. So I definitely thought that those were some of the most powerful ones of those cycles as well. I actually do think the green one's going to be the one that sees the most play in the Mythic cycle that you mentioned earlier, but this one is definitely really good too.
I mean, Dave, you're forgetting perhaps that when you cast Emeria's Call, you make a 7/7 Shark token. So,
oh hell yeah,
it's the best of all worlds.
You mean when you have Typhoon out as well? Yes. Already? Got it.
Oh yeah, you're good to go.
Hard cast it all the time.
Let's talk about Forsaken Monument really quickly. I know this is a card that I think we all were interested in. So it's a 5-mana artifact, legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. Okay. So this seems like it has some potential homes, but is it good? Like, much like kind of like that red enchantment we just talked about earlier, is this doing enough as this artifact that costs 5? And so what? Like there's Karn decks, there's Tron style decks, there's ramp style decks that are colorless. Does a lot of little things. Does it add up?
I think this card is an excellent Karn the Great Creator wish target, and I think that this card is going to be good specifically against opponents who are disrupting your mana with Cleansing Wildfire, Spreading Seas, Blood Moon. You have Karn, which you cast for 4 mana while your opponent's disrupting your mana, and then you cast this, and all of a sudden you can cast all of your big spells because it doubles your mana. It also seems, good in Eldrazi Tron with cards like Walking Ballista, where you can get it, play a Ballista for 0, just have that 2/2 for 0 mana, or just remove all the counters and still have Ballista in play. I think is cool. I just think it's going to be a good Karn the Great Creator target for Tron decks, and that's probably it.
I mean, this is the kind of card that if you end up in a situation where you're threat light at the end of the game and you're like, I'm going to play a Matter Reshaper, but it's a 5/4, but it's a Juggernaut now. Like, I guess I could help give you some closing power, which is seems like a good thing as well. I'm definitely not an expert at playing decks like that. I mean, Shane, you guys have both played a lot of Karn the Great Creator decks, I know, but I haven't played a lot of Eldrazi Tron. So, yeah, cool card. Seems like a good one of to get for your sideboard there. Do we think it's a sure win, or do we think it's like a meta call?
I think that it's almost definitely going to make the cut, just because it's so good in those sideboard games when people are disrupting your mana. All of a sudden, you can oftentimes cast Karn while your opponent's disrupting your mana, and that's one of the biggest draws to the card, I think, in the Tron decks. And the fact that just you can tutor this up when your opponent's disrupting your mana, and all of a sudden all your big spells are online, I think that's really powerful.
So I guess you like it because maybe it's a little bit faster than something like a Crucible of Worlds, where it's like, okay, like, yeah, I'm expecting more mana disruption and more mana destruction, so I'm going to play Crucible, and I can get that out and then start getting my lands back out of the graveyard. But this is just sort of like an instant ramp like back into the game.
Especially because of cleansing Wildfire specifically. I think that your opponents are going to be able to cast like 2 of those. Crucible is really slow.
Yeah.
This just, not only does this double your mana, but you're getting a ton of life. Your creatures are getting bigger. It's doing a lot of other things to just generate advantage.
So one question I have about this card, real quick, is if you have Tron active, does it only give you an additional colorless if you tap it for a single colorless? That's what I'm trying to look it up right now.
Yeah, or like when if you tap an Urza's Tower for 3 colorless, are you getting an additional 3 or an additional 1? I can't imagine it like
I believe
being that good.
I'm reading it as just adding 1 additional.
Yeah,
mana.
that's what I would imagine.
All right, so check the Zendikar Rising release notes, because we can't find them right now, to make sure that what conditions this works, because the way I read it is when you tap a permanent for a single colorless mana, you get an additional colorless mana, which means if Tron was on, it wouldn't trigger. So
yeah. The doubling effects usually say double instead of add an additional 1.
Right. So let's take just listeners, check that one out. I definitely hear what Everett's saying, though. It's a nice backup plan for if someone is keeping you off of Tron, you get that extra mana from it. I think that makes a ton of sense, because think of it this way. If someone gets rid of your Urza's Tower and you have Mine, and Power Plant, that's still 6 mana once you have Monument out. So, if you can get yourself into an advantageous position to play it, then you get to move on your merry way, kind of go from there. They put cards like this at Mythic for a reason, right? Okay. Shane, what are you thinking about?
Man, I'm thinking about Ruin Crab. Single blue mana, crab, creature crab. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, each opponent mills 3 cards. It's a 0/3. You're welcome, mill fans. You got another crab. You got Hedron Crab Part 2. You got 8 of them now.
A lot of people are hyping this up. Notably, this has a very, very relevant 3rd point of toughness, which I think is really interesting, where Hedron Crab is only an 0/2. This is an 0/3. And I think that is going to matter a lot for the mill decks, because mill in Modern is a control deck. It's a control deck with mill as a win condition. It's playing a lot of disrupting elements while it's enacting its game plan. I kind of think this card's a little weird, because 1 mana removal spells like Fatal Push are not good against mill right now, but this card makes Fatal Push good against mill. But Path is still going to be bad, and I definitely think it's a big hit for the mill fans.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm kind of like, we talk a lot about something on here. I mean, this is like a concept that Frank Karsten, I think, wrote an article about a while ago called the Rule of 8, where it's like once you go from 4 copies of an effect to 8 copies of an effect in Modern, essentially, you really get these decks that kind of can become real decks. Like Storm is the prototypical example, I think, where you go from 4 to 8 Goblin Lecture Managers with Baral being printed. So does this do anything to move the needle that way, or does it just kind of help mill become a little bit more consistent than what it is right now?
I think that the mill has a huge problem where if anybody ever wants to beat it, they can. With playing one Eldrazi in their sideboard means you have a really good mill matchup. Leyline of Sanctity is really good against it. They're often pretty bad against decks like Goldfish. But I do think that, like many other decks in Modern, good mill players have good win percentages in Modern, and I think that mill is going to get better, and definitely that first week people are going to be playing 8 crab.
8 crab. Mm-hmm. Add it to our 8 rack and 8 whack kind of pantheon of 8 names.
8
I love it.
Crab. I know we're going to get some feedback from Craig very quickly in the Slack.
All right, can we talk about a controversial card?
Please, I want to argue.
I would like to talk about Wayward Guidebeast, the single red trample haste 2/2. The Goblin Guide reprint, quote unquote, that says whenever Wayward Guidebeast deals combat damage to a player, return a land you control to its owner's hand. As someone who likes to play aggro decks, I really don't know what to make of this card, because that text is so scary on there. That's basically like, I have to return a land I control. I have to. The only deck that I've seen so far that tries to turn this into an advantage is a landfall aggro deck that I saw Saffron Olive post on Twitter sometime last week, which is just basically like, yeah, Wayward Guidebeast is fine. You pick it up so that you can keep attacking with your landfall creatures like Aquaworm Hellhound and Step Links. That's like the main positive version of this that I saw. But part of me just keeps wondering, like, what if this drawback isn't that bad for a deck that just wants to play a lot of 1-drops? Is there any scenario where this works?
I actually kind of like this card. I don't think it's as good as Goblin Guide, but saying it's not as good as maybe the best red 1-drop ever printed. Honestly, Swift Spear is probably better, whatever. I don't think that's, that doesn't mean it's unplayable. I think one very common play pattern you'll see with this card is playing it, attacking with it, returning your land, and then on the next turn, attacking with it before you play your land on turn 2. And so you've gotten in for 4 damage and you've only returned 1 land at that point. A lot of times, if you have 2 1-drops, you'll just play this as your second 1-drop, and the downside won't be that much.
Man, Evart is a lot smarter than me with the sequencing. Right there is what unlocks it. Yeah.
It doesn't have the Goblin Guide downside. This is a worse downside, but that is a difference. I think the card is a playable Magic card. I am not, a big red mage, but it does have synergies with Landfall. It has synergies with Revolt. Sometimes it'll make mana when you tap your mana on your main phase, attack, and return it when you don't have a land to play. I think that's pretty interesting as well. I like the card. I don't think it immediately slots into any decks, but I don't think it's unplayable. I think it's pretty good.
I mean, I like that scenario that you described where you talked about it as your second 1-drop, or maybe your third one even. You go like turn 1 Goblin Guide. Like, let's say you're playing a deck that's just mono modern 1-drops, right? And you go Goblin Guide, and then you go Monastery, Swift Spear, Wayward Guidebeast on turn 2, and you just swing in. Like, that's pretty good.
But especially because we've seen those triple Goblin Guide draws in Modern are great, and now you have 8 guide effects. Maybe on turn 2 you can only get 2 down, but I think that if you hit your opponent with Wayward Guidebeast on turn 1, and then you hit him again on turn 2, and then you play your second land after you hit them, you'll be pretty happy with that exchange, getting 4 damage in immediately. I think the card's going to be solid.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I'm going to go pre-order some of those now.
Bad dash, weird dash.
Yeah, it's very strange dash. It's land dash.
Evart, what's a card we haven't talked about yet? That's again cool in your eyes that we're overlooking.
There's the modal card Inscription of Ruin, the 3-mana sorcery that is kind of like a charm, but you can kick it to get all 3 modes. So it's 3 mana. You can choose 1, and if you kick it for a total of 7 mana, you get all 3 of these modes. So target opponent discards 2 cards, return a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, or destroy a creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. I think this card is of modern power level. It reminds me a lot of Archmage's Charm. Maybe not quite as powerful, but does similar things without so much restrictive mana cost, being just 1 black and 2 colorless. I could see Jund wanting to play this, just like with Liliana the Veil. Getting those 2 extra cards is really relevant. Just like the fact that it's Bind Rot with 2 other modes, I think is really, really good. The kicker is gravy. I am planning on casting this card in Modern, and I think that it will be good.
Wow, that's awesome. I looked at this card and was like, I don't know how this gets there, but that is really great to hear that you see potential in it.
Yeah, again, I think it's valuing flexibility over rate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It gets back Tarmogoyf, it gets back Death Shadow, gets back Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah.
It kills almost every creature in Modern. There aren't too many that cost 4 or more. There are some, but card advantage, removal, or board presence, and the ability to be all 3 in the late game. I just love it.
How many you'd run a couple of these, you think?
Yeah, 1 or 2. Probably not a 4 of, although Mind Rots are often good at multiples in some matchups.
Yeah, when you really just want to take somebody's hand away. What about the other 2 inscriptions? Why do you feel like they just didn't get there? Like the blue one is just like, what are we even doing? I feel like a little bit like the modes that they picked were very strange to me. Like they just wanted to not have it be super powerful. And then the green one, I actually think feels pretty flexible because it is so cheap and it's an instant. But the modes there again are kind of medium.
Yeah, the blue and the green one feel like maybe standard cards, maybe not. The blue one feels so close to being good. Just the fact that it's a sorcery makes me not like it a ton. But I've cast plenty of Glimmer of Geniuses. This is a modal Glimmer of Genius that could be a creature or removal. maybe the blue one's better than we're giving it credit for, but maybe it's just a standard card. The green one is kind of funny because there is a mode on it that says target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures they control, which kills any number of shadows or the new Death Shadow, the Scourge.
That's interesting.
I think that is intentionally supposed to do that, but I don't know. I don't think every cycle is supposed to be constructed powerhouse necessarily, especially if you look at like the cons of Tarkir commands.
Yeah, and especially if you look at the fact that they didn't even make the red one, and infamously didn't make the red one or the white one in this cycle.
I saw a tweet about that. They said that they worked on it. They just couldn't find what they were happy with, so they decided not to. And I think that's fine. If they're just going to they probably gave red and white something else instead.
Yeah, I think it's fine too. It's just an interesting thing that happened. I will say the black one was the first one that was spoiled from this cycle, and I was definitely like, okay, this one is okay. I'm excited to see what the other ones are. And then the other two came out and I was like, all right, well, I'm glad to hear one of them has some potential at least. So you think mostly like mid-rangey type decks are going to value this flexibility?
Specifically like Black Green Rock or Jund or Death Shadow will play one or two copies if the card is good enough, like I think it is.
Awesome.
Can we talk about another black sorcery? Feed the Swarm. One of the black. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. Targeted enchantment hate in black. This is a new effect. Black has never had anything like this. They tack on the life lost in order to make it something in black's color pie. But this is a novel thing. This is something that black now has access to and people have to think about, and black will have the opportunity to like run in the sideboard or something like that. Or even just, if you could run this main, like if you really wanted to have a bad removal spell, but is flexible against, like if enchantment's ruling the roost, like let's say Bogles is tier 1 again or something like that.
Yeah, I don't love that this card exists. I've always felt like Duress, Thoughtseize, the Slaughter Games type effects. So you get these enchantments out of your opponent's deck have been black's ways to deal with enchantments. I'm not on the color council, but I think that this seems to me to be too efficient of a answer for enchantments for black's first ever targeted enchantment removal. The fact that it also kills a creature is wild to me.
Yeah.
And it's not like black either. It's one in the black. It's easy to even splash if you wanted to. And like the downside's not that bad. Like what the most you're taking is like 4 damage.
Mm-hmm. And Death Shadow decks might even want to take the 4 damage.
Yeah, I was going to say the only deck that it feels to me like this goes into, though, like color pie concerns aside, as far as like eternal play goes, it really only feels to me like this goes into a deck that wants the life loss, which is Death Shadow, which that's kind of where my mind goes. I don't know if I see a scenario where there's really an enchantment out there that a black deck has got to get rid of, unless it's like 8-rack and Leyline of Sanctity or something like that. So
yeah, I bet 8-rack players are thrilled with Feed the Swarm, and I hope they have a good time casting it.
Yeah, exactly. So side note, I feel like I've talked a lot about Death Shadow during this spoiler season. We just talked about 2 more cards that could have places in Death Shadow. Does it feel like Shadow got a lot of tools to you too from this set? Like it's kind of weirdly feels like there's 3 or 4 cards that might be under consideration for use.
Yes, I think Shadow definitely gets a lot of buffs.
And I know you're already brewing with it or trying different versions away from Grixis, so that's cool to see. I'm just surprised because it doesn't really feel like an archetype that they were looking to support a couple of years ago, and now there's all these cards that synergize really well with it.
I think it just like is one of those things that incidentally gets help. I don't think it's intentional, but Shadow is a 1-mana card that cares about you losing life, and just there are lots of things that I think are going to incidentally complement it.
Can we talk about a card that I think is not going to get there, and I'm curious to get your take on? Let's talk about Deliberate, which is 1 colorless and a blue for an instant, and it is preordained. Scry 2, then draw a card at instant speed. 2 mana is way, way, way more than 1 mana, but this is an instant. My gut is that it still doesn't fit just because I think people are going to play Opt because of the casting cost more often. but I'm curious to see what you two think.
Well, I mean, this is something that I'm just going to tee Evert up here, right? Is like Omen of the Sea. Is that what it is? Is one in the blue, right?
It's the same costing cost. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, the thing that Omen of the Sea does is it stays on the board. It can be cashed in, or it can be bounced with Yorian or something like that. And I think that's where the value you get out of it. But you tell me, like, this is different. It's an instant. It's a spell that can be used in spell-based decks, and Omen of the Sea doesn't really. So
yeah, there are differences between Deliberate and Omen of the Sea. I think that Omen of the Sea is largely going to be better. I think, specifically in Miracles, that was the deck I played a lot of Omen of the Sea, and the card is great. But the ability to sack it for the Scry 2 was really, really relevant. The ability to balance it with Teferi is really relevant. It also enables other things like Yorion, like Revolts, Devotion, returning with Luris. All of these are relevant in Modern and Pioneer, and Deliberate does none of those, but you can flash it back with Snapcaster and return it with Mystic Sanctuary, but it is not even unique in those effects. And I think that it's basically always going to be worse than Omen of the Sea, with maybe a couple exceptions.
I'll cross that off my pre-order list. Thank you.
Archon of Emeria, a card so boring. Didn't we talk about this last week? But I don't think we did. It's a 2 and a white Archon or Archon, probably Archon, right? So it flies. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. Non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped 2/3. This is moderately useful, right? This is a 2/3 flying rule of law with additional text of the non-basic lands, right? It fits great in like your Archon tribal deck. Instead of, you don't have to run Eidolon of Rhetoric anymore. In your Archon tribal, you have a true Archon card to go in there. I don't know. I think this has play. Probably more in like the rate is too much for Modern, I think. But if rule of law is sometimes there, or Eidolon of Rhetoric is sometimes there, who knows?
I think Eidolon is a pretty good card in Modern at the moment, actually. I think it's actually really good against the Mono Red Prowess decks. But it's honestly a big part of why it's so good is that 4th point of toughness.
Right. Yeah.
It's also good against the combo decks, but
I did not give the power and toughness. Oh, the Eidolon of Rhetoric is the 4, is the 1/4, right?
Yeah, and this is a 2/3 flyer. I mean, a 2/3 flyer is a better rate than a 1/4 not flyer, and it also has that Thalia, Heretic Cathar, non-basic lands tapped. I could see this card getting there if a Taxes deck is playable in Modern, but I think it's pretty rare that a Taxes deck is playable in Modern. It's always so tough because you always have to curve out, you have to draw well, and your curve has to line up well against what your opponent is doing. And you have to play really, really tight, and you have very little card selection to find your Hate Bearer at the right time, because you don't have access to Imperial Recruiter or Recruiter of the Guard in Modern. But I think this card could be a role player. I think that there's definitely some potential here.
I felt like this went into Spirits and Pioneer just because you get that buff off of the Empyrean Eagle, and it's just a nice thing to have around against Lotus Field kind of decks.
I like it there. Good idea. It stops Bring to Light too.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, yeah, it feels like a good sideboard piece to have around for that deck. Shane, can I ask you about Grakmaw, the Skyclave Ravager?
Oh man, I love this card, Dave.
Why don't you read it if you love it?
I love the Hydra Horror. Okay, so it's a legendary Hydra Horror, 1 black green, so 1 Golgari for a 0/0. Why would you want to play that? That seems bad. Oh, it enters the battlefield with 3 1/1 counters on it. And whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a 1/1 counter on it, you put a 1/1 counter on Grakmaw. When Grakmaw dies, create an XX black and green Hydra creature token, where X is the number of 1/1 counters on Grakmaw. This is cool. This is a cool card, right? So default is a 3/3 for 3, whatever, not that great. But you're not going to be playing this in any typical deck, right? This is going to be something that a Golgari Scales type deck would be running. So you might have one or two Scales type effects, like you might have your Winding Constrictor, you might have a Hardened Scales. This comes in as like a 5/5 for 3. Other creatures you control are going to have counters on them. When they're getting fatal pushed or something like that, then you get counters on Grakmaw. When Grakmaw eventually trades off or gets revolted, fatal pushed or something like that, then it's just a straight up card advantage where you get like another creature out of it for like 3 mana. This is doing a lot for 3 mana.
Yeah,
I think.
I think it's cool. Definitely a sweet card. I could see it seeing some Pioneer play. I'm a little worried about Fairy Time Raveler bouncing it, but besides that, I really hope it gets there. The card is awesome.
I was even wondering if it just went in some mid-rangey kind of stuff where you just kind of get two 3/3s out of it and you don't even care. I mean, it's not gonna like light the world on fire with that, but it's a useful tool if in a metagame where maybe you're going to you can trade off with a lot of creatures with it. So
could be good in like the Jund Sacrifice deck if people still like to play that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Pair it with your other favorite card, Shane, Village Rites. Play it until it's good and then go for it.
Village Rites is definitely like one of the decks that I will be testing as soon as possible. Like now that I'm feeling some energy and having some time to get back into playing Magic more regularly. I've had a pretty crazy past few weeks, so I've been more of a active observer than active player. But now I have some time to grind, and I'm finally going to be able to test some Village Rite decks, I think.
Everett, let's go back to your list for the next one. Which would you like to look at from the cards you were thinking about?
Lullmage's Domination, the uncommon, the triple blue X card that costs 3 less to cast if it targets an opponent's creature who has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. It says gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X. So if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard for 3 mana, you can gain control of a creature. I think this card is a very interesting sideboard card in Modern. Kind of reminds me of Vidalcan Shackles, but playable. It's really interesting in Mystic Sanctuary mana bases. And just there are a lot of matchups like Jund and Shadow where your opponents are filling up their graveyard really quickly and they have some really powerful high impact creatures. And most of the time, this is going to be 3 mana, steal your opponent's creature. It does steal Uro, although stealing Uro is kind of hard because of the delve aspect and the fact that if they kill their Uro, it goes back to their graveyard. But I think that this card is going to be sometimes played in Modern sideboards for mid-range matchups where creatures are prominent, like Tarmogoyf, Death Shadow, cards like that.
I mean, the cost reduction mechanic is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remind yourself, like you said, that if you're going to play this card, that it needs to be against decks that are going to do the work for you, unless you're doing some kind of, like that Delver, a Thieves Guild Enforcer kind of thing, where you're playing this out of the board to kind of help you push through with that, where you're doing some of the work with like Drown in the Lock. But
even if you just have a lot of cheap 1-for-1s, Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, even Thought Scour your opponent for a couple cards, I think it definitely has potential. And even if you don't have it on against a Death Shadow or Tarmogoyf, if it's 4 or 5 mana to steal their creature, it's not too bad.
Yeah,
it's not too bad.
I mean, it's nice that it is not a permanent, that it's a spell effect too. And so I like that you pointed out you could do it with Sanctuary, but also just not having it be an enchantment that can be removed or bounced or something like that is good too. So
potentially very powerful. Definitely a card to keep an eye on.
Cool. What else you got?
Legion Angel, I think, is one of the coolest cards I've ever read. It's a 4 mana, 4/3, 2 white and 2 colorless for a 4/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a card you own named Legion Angel from outside the game and put it into your hand.
That's awesome. I got to tell you, this was on my list of cards that I was thinking about putting on our review last week. So I'm glad that we did not, and that we waited to hear what you have to say about it. Because I read it and I was like, this seems like a really interesting Squadron Hawk kind of thing, but how do you split it up to make it work the best way possible?
And I don't know the answer to that. I kind of want to be greedy and just play 1 in the main deck and 3 in the sideboard. Because in Modern and probably Pioneer, you probably never want to draw 2 naturally. Never, ever, ever. But when you ever draw that one copy that's going to turn into 4 over the course of a game, maybe you take an Aether Vial up to 4, but taking Vial up to 4 is pretty costly. whenever you do draw it, it's going to be pretty powerful. I have had some success in like green-white, Aether Vial, Eldormi's Call, mid-range decks in Modern, and just the ability to like Eldormi's Call for this, and then Vial is a lot of card advantage. It does also cost 3 sideboard slots, which is a lot, but just it's such an interesting card. I've seen people argue for a 2-2 split in the main and the sideboard, a 1-3 split in the, 3 in the main and 1 in the sideboard. I've heard arguments for all the different numbers, and I think that 1 in the main and 3 in the board is going to be the best way to go for a lot of decks, but it's just super cool.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to note about this too is like the rate is fine, right? Like a 4/3 flyer is fine, and if it draws you extra cards, that's absurd, right? If it's a 4/3 4/4 or for 4 draw 3 cards, that's like, whoa, that's big time. So
one other thing, if this card does end up being modern playable and you want to play multiple copies in your main deck, if you pitch it to Force of Virtue, you can kind of mitigate that downside of drawing multiples sometimes.
More stuff that Stan loves. We'll tell him about it next week. Shane, anything else on your list?
Another novel black card that I think is less objectively good than some of the other ones we talked about. It's a land enchantment, Lithoform Blight, 1 in a black. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Okay, fine with that. Enchanted land loses all land types and abilities and has tap, add single colorless, and also tap, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color. So black has like a history of land destruction, right? But recently, I don't think it's been like a large part of the color. And so I kind of like this as an option for black, especially maybe like in Pioneer, where the land hate in black is pretty weak. Like, this is kind of like Spreading Seas, right? If Spreading Seas can see play for blue, this could potentially see play for black, but note that it doesn't take the opponent off their colors, which is like a huge benefit of Seas. So you're not getting a Spreading Seas effect in reality, but it's an effect nonetheless that also cycles while getting you it. I don't know if it gets there though. The pay 1 life is kind of easy.
I think it's interesting. It can also fix your own mana, which is kind of cool. Like underneath the Blood Moon for like black mid-range decks in Modern. Maybe you're like some kind of Orzhov or black-green deck. You don't have access to Cleansing Wildfire or Spreading Seas, and you don't want to play Fulminator Mage, but you can pick up this card. I kind of like it. It also gets Veil of Summered, so keep that in mind.
Rough. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you look at this card in comparison to Cleansing Wildfire, right? Where it's kind of like maybe we're going to push that way instead, but this is a cool card to have around as well, and it's the latest in a long tradition of black enchantments that mess with lands. I have a card I wanted to is on your list, Evert, that I wanted to go back to, which is Maul of the Skyclaves. So I'll read it real quick for everybody. Maul of the Skyclaves is 2 colorless and a white. It is an artifact equipment. And it has the auto-equip ability, so it says when Maul of the Skyclaves enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and first strike.
Yeah, I think this card is really cool. I can see it in Modern, in Stoneforge Mystic Shells that are playing more creatures, like more mid-range versions. Like, I don't think it's going to be very good in like the Sharkblade deck I've been playing. It doesn't seem very good to equip it to a shark. But if you are playing a more mid-range creature-heavy deck, I think this is a good tool, especially to break up some board stalls against the Field of the Dead decks. Specifically, I dislike that it gives flying, and if you're trying to build a Nahiri Colossus Hammer deck, there's some tension there because Colossus Hammer makes your creature lose flying. But I think the card has potential, and I'll definitely be trying it out.
Yeah, I mean, that auto-equip ability is pretty powerful. Right, like the other card that I looked at occasionally was the one that gives landfall +2/+2 basically, but has auto equip. It's a one mana one, and this just seems like a whole other level where it keeps the +2/+2 forever, has flying, has another buff. So I'm glad that they put some decent equipment on these, but it doesn't seem like they really broke it in a way that would make us regret the fact that they ever put that line of text onto something.
Yeah, it's definitely a pretty juicy line of text. I hope that it's good. It's a really cool card.
Yeah. And then the last card I wanted to ask you about that's on your list is Felidar Retreat.
Yeah, this one is something I've been raising my eyebrow at. I don't think I've heard many people talk about it. But Felidar Retreat is a white enchantment. It's 3 colorless and a white, and it has landfall. And the landfall can make a 2/2 cat creature token, or it can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and give all creatures vigilance till end of turn. And there was a card back in the last Zendikar set that I think was called Retreat to, I can't remember what, I think Emeria maybe. But it was just this card, but worse, where it made a 1/1 token and it buffed your team till the end of turn. And I don't think it gave vigilance, but it was basically the same card as this, but half as good for the same rate. And that card did see some standard play. That card was a card that people were interested in trying out. And Magic has definitely become a lot more powerful. But a card that saw play, and then you see a version that's basically twice as good, I'm very interested in. It's also basically Field of the Dead as an enchantment, but better because you can also buff your tokens. And I think that that's very interesting because Field of the Dead, in Modern at least, really is a spell. And, if you are in on that, you can have more effects with your Felidar Retreats, buff your zombie tokens with the second ability. Maybe Field of the Dead gets banned, but you still want to play a Bant Uro Growth Spiral deck. You could look to play this card. I think it's potentially really powerful. I don't think I've heard many people talk about it, and I'd at least have my eye out.
Yeah, it's funny. The only thing I've seen about it is like a meme online where it's like Retreat to Emeria looking at Felidar Retreat and being like, what? Why would you do this to me? But it does take some, like, you want to double check it, like you said. And it's just twice as good. It's a double the size creature, double the counters, permanent counters, and vigilance until the end of the turn. All right. And I promised the last card was the last card, but this is actually going to be the last card. Just because I'm really curious about what Evert thinks about Seagate Stormcaller, the mythic blue card that doubles when you cast your next spell when you cast it. Two versions that I wanted to ask about this. One was, we spent a lot of time last week talking about this card as just like a value engine, kind of similar to Snapcaster Mage. How's it fit? How's it compare to that? And then in the last week, there's been some kind of social media chatter about Stormcaller as a combo piece with Neoform. And I was curious if either one of those things, what do you think about this card, and if either one of those kind of paths kind of piqued your interest at all?
So Seagate Stormcaller is a very cool card. It feels very similar to the new Goblin Guide, Wayward Guidebeast, in that it seems worse than Goblin Guide. This seems worse than Snapcaster, but worse than Snapcaster isn't necessarily the end of the world. I don't think that it's going to, pairing it with Neoform to get Heliod and the Spike Feeder is really going to be all that good, especially because if that is a deck, you can just respond to the ETB trigger and kill the Stormcaller, and then they need another 2-mana creature to sacrifice the Neoform. And also, the Infinite Life doesn't win very many games of Modern, sadly. I don't think this card is going to have a big constructed impact. In the lower power formats, like Standard and Pioneer, the spells that you have access to copy are less powerful. So you're copying Shocks instead of Lightning Bolts. Copying Thoughtseize on turn 3 might be good. Copying Fatal Push might be good sometimes, but you just don't have access to cards like Manamorphose. You have less powerful creatures at 2-4 with Neoform. And I think that this card is not going to get there. I think the kicker on the card is very, very rarely going to come up. 7 mana, and then you have to spend more mana on another spell is so much. I'm sure it will happen, but is just a tiny bit of extra gravy. It was just fine for a kicker ability. But I don't see this making a big splash in Pioneer or Modern.
Yeah. The only place I'm wondering about it now is everybody seems to be excited about it in Historic as well. And so I guess we'll just see how that goes. Since I don't play Arena, we'll see if that's the next Muxus that people complain about or something like that. But
I've never played any Historic. Muxus is crazy. I don't see this being as good as that card, but maybe there's something I'm missing.
Awesome. Well, I think that's kind of it for the spoilers. It's interesting. We kind of hit a lot of really high profile cards in the first week, and there's some good cards here, but there's a lot of cards that add to a lot of different sets in Zendikar Rising, and I'm excited to try it out once it comes out of Magic Online this weekend, basically, I believe, or maybe next week even.
Tomorrow.
Or is that what the update is tomorrow?
Yeah. They're coming to Magic Online tomorrow.
Oh man, so I get to watch streamers tomorrow and see people playing new decks, maybe test something myself. This is exciting. Everett, we have probably time for a few questions for you. We didn't get a bunch of questions from the Slack. It's almost no longer that special to have you on because it's just you're the unofficial fourth host. But I do have some questions that I'm curious about. Like, what do you think is going to be like the most impactful card for Modern or Pioneer, if you think something's like specifically for Pioneer from Zendikar Rising, and more importantly, like why do you think it's bringing that impact?
So my head is telling me Cleansing Wildfire. I think the card is incredibly flexible and fills a lot of roles as Tron Hate, as mana fixing under Blood Moon, as just maybe a good card in general. It's good with Lead and Arbiter. I think that card is going to see a lot of play in both Pioneer and Modern. Just a good card. But my heart is telling me Omnath. I think Omnath is just kind of nuts.
Wow.
Yeah, I really think that everything about the card is bananas. Just if you can ever play it and a fetch land in the same turn, you're spending 4 mana, draw a card, gain 4 life, get the 4 mana you just spent back, do something else. The card just seems bananas, and I can see it being good in both Pioneer and Modern, and I'm definitely going to be casting it.
Yeah, you might be able to, in that sequence, you could end it with Yorion out of your hand, maybe, and then flip it again, you know?
There seems to be a ton of crazy sequences, and it also draws a card when it enters, and it's a 4/4 for 4. The card, the mana cost is tough, but the mana cost is very doable.
Is there like a deck or like a brew that you already have in mind that you're like that you've built in your mind, or even like tested somewhere that you think has like real potential that you're really excited about?
Well, for Omnath, there's the Soul Herder deck. I've already been splashing red in like the Bant Soul Herder deck for Avalanche Riders. This card just fits right in there. Nahiri is going to generate a few different brews for me, and I hope that it's good. I'm excited to try out some of these new tools in Death Shadow and in blue-white control with some of the big instants or sorceries. I don't know if I'm going to play any Titan, but I think the new Mythic land will be really good in Titan. I kind of want to try Jace Mirror Mage in blue-white, counterbalance Miracles in Modern. Maybe not play counterbalance. Like the Scry 2 is kind of cute. Probably not going to be very good, but I'll try it once or twice.
At least the casting cost isn't bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, those are just some of my ideas. I always spend a couple weeks on stream just playing with new cards whenever Zendikar or whenever the new set comes out, and that's what I'll be doing.
So I think we were already talking about the metagame evolving away from Uro as being quite so dominant in Modern. So it doesn't really feel like there's much here that's a direct tool against Uro, but maybe there are maybe just the metagame's naturally moving away from that, and so it's going to open up. The metagame's already opening, and so new cards, I think it's a great time to get new cards into the format as well, because there's probably a lot of opportunity for people to see what's going to happen with them.
Yeah, I do think in Modern, people are shifting away from Uro. There does seem to be kind of a prevailing mindset that the Uro decks are too good, but that hasn't been my experience playing with and against them. I do think Uro is a pretty unfun card. The fact that the game revolves around it so much and it keeps coming back again and again and again. But there are lots of cards in Modern that line up really well against it. The aggro decks can out-tempo it. Blood Moon is good against it. Jace is good against it. Teferi is good against it. Remand, Rest in Peace, Spreading Seas can even cut them off double green sometimes. Sword of Feast and Famine. There's a lot of play against it, and I think people are getting better at playing against it. I don't think there's a ton from Zendikar specifically that will be great against Uro, with the exception of maybe Cleansing Wildfire. It's just going to make it hard for them to double green. If you just have 2 Cleansing Wildfires, these Uro decks only play 2 forests. I could definitely see you stranding the Uros in the graveyard just by casting a couple of those.
I think that, I'm excited to get going on this, and I'm glad that I pre-brought 4 Cleansing Wildfires, so I know that I'll have them right away, because I definitely a sweet card. I'm excited to hear how excited you are to play it too.
Let's head on into the promotional zone. Everett, tell people how they can engage with you online, how they can see your content, how they can hang out with you while you're streaming.
Yeah, I stream every weekday from 9 a.m. to about 3, sometimes 4 p.m. Central Standard Time over on twitch.tv/Aspiringspike. I usually try to play one weekend tournament too, but those are a little less structured. I'm also on Twitter, on twitter.com/Aspiringspike, and hope to see you guys in the stream.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, your stream is still the one I turn on and just have on in the background when I'm watching Magic. I'm looking forward to engaging with you in the near future, man. And if maybe during downtime we actually can, maybe people will have watched us play that new what's that game that everyone's playing now? It's like
Among Us.
Among Us. Fall Guys is already dead. Now it's time for Among Us.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just like the quarantine gaming lifespan is so short. But yeah, a bunch of other streamers that they wanted to play. I've never played. I don't know how it's going to go, but I'd love to have you play some games.
All right. So that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our podcast. You get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. Your iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, whatever you use, automatically download us. It does a couple of things, right? Like one, you get the podcast right away. You don't have to remember to download it. And two, it lets us know that people are into us and lets us know that people are actually listening to us. So we appreciate people who are doing that. And if you use Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a review. We love reviews, makes us feel good about ourselves, makes us also know what people like that we're doing. So let us know what you're into about the Dive Down. If you want to give us a question, ask us something about Modern, Pioneer, you can tweet at us at the Dive Down or email thedivedown@gmail.com. Of course, if you want to support the show, join our Patreon. You join at any tier, even $1 an episode, you get immediate access to our super secret Slack server. We love hanging out with people. We have good conversations there all day. You can go to patreon.com/thedivedown. Again, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring us. You can sign up with them using promo code TheDiveDown, all one word, for 20% off your first 3 months of renting Magic Online cards. Thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and watch Aspiring Spike.